Mumonkan, case number 13. Tokusan holds his eating bowls. This koan is quite long and much more complex than the usual, involving many personalities and many interwoven stories. So let me read this koan bit by bit. In fact, I divided it into parts. So I'll provide some background for each one of those parts and then give you some of my rendering about what this story represents for you, the viewer. So let's start with the first part, main case. One day, old Master Tokusan went down towards the dining hall, holding his eating bowls. Seppo was on duty, cooking. When he met Tokusan, he asked, "Where are you off to with your eating bowls? The bell has not rung, and the drum has not sounded." Tokusan turned around and went back to his room. So for the story, Master Tokusan appears several times in the Zen Koans and is a renowned Zen teacher in China's 9th century. And this story happens toward the end of his life. On the other hand, we have Seppo, and Seppo here is the head cook of the monastery. And according to history, Seppo only opened his Dharma eye many years after this story happened. So he was not yet at that moment enlightened. Afterwards, though, later in life, Seppo also became a Zen master in his own right. Tokusan may have been confused by the time of day. He may have slept, thinking he must have missed hearing the drum and the gong announcing the midday meal. So he went downstairs thinking he's going to go and join lunch. And as a junior monk, Seppo's behavior can be seen as rather arrogant. This is something one might only know when you have lived yourself in such a monastery. But the right behavior for this Seppo would have been to bow and say, "Sorry, master, the meal is not yet ready," rather than, "Hey, old man, where are you off to with your eating bowls?" That, especially in the Chinese context, was not a right behavior. And probably in the kitchen there were a few attendant cooks watching this story closely and noticing the head cook's arrogance and wondering how Tokusan would react. Would Tokusan become irritated? Would Tokusan become angry? Maybe he would even hit Seppo. Instead, Tokusan just peacefully turned around and returned to his quarters. So what could possibly be the meaning of this story? As ordinary people, we tend to live in duality. We take ourselves to be this body-mind, this thing over here. And the surrounding world then is not ours, is out there. And that's what usually is understood by dualism, living in dualism. However, through meditation, we find that this distinction of me here and the world out there is a fabricated one. It's fabricated by our own thinking minds. It's an artificially imagined division. Let me give you 3 quick examples. Take, for example, your breath. There is a phenomenon, breath, out there, and there is something observing the breath. It looks like there are 2 here, breath, observer, but look at it very closely. Can you really find a borderline between breath and the observer? No, there is no such borderline. It's just a fabricated division which we imagine to exist, breath there, observer here. In fact, it's one. Second example, let's take the sound of the gong. There is the sound which you can hear, and there is something over there which hears. But where is exactly the borderline between sound and observer? And when you deeply look, you find no border anywhere. There is just oneness, because this division again is just fabricated by your own thinking mind. And let's take a third example, the example of a thought. Imagine, for example, a giraffe. Image of giraffe comes up in you, and you think there is a giraffe up there, the imagined giraffe up there, and an observer or the observing space of that image over here, as if there were 2. But where is the borderline? Where is the division between the thought image and the observer of that image? Here again, there is no such division. It's just seamless. It's just one. Any such division is just a fabrication of your thinking mind. And we can continue the sight of this room. We can continue the smell of incense or of a flower, or the taste of kiwi, and so on and so forth. We can continue deconstructing the dualistic illusion bit by bit, till we find ourselves in oneness, this space of awareness in which all phenomena merge, like waves that merge in the ocean. Waves are not separate from the ocean. They are not like flying over the ocean. They are very much integrated within the ocean. So, let's go back to our old Zen master Tokusan. He lives and is immersed in this bath of unity, in this bath of non-dualism. After years and years of practice, not as a notion, not as a, yes, now I understand, no, but as a lived experience, he is oneness. And when he went into the kitchen that day and met Seppo, who said, "Hey man, where are you off to with your eating bowls?" He did not see this scene as being as outside of himself. It was very much a comic situation with which he was really one. So, like we practiced with the breath, like the sound of the gong, like the thought of a giraffe or the sight of the room, etc., etc., Tokusan didn't experience Seppo as outside. He probably just smiled. His peace wasn't disturbed. How could it be disturbed? And he just simply turned back and went to his quarters, which also is a beautiful image, by the way, this turning back to his quarters, which would be just like a wave returning into the ocean. So what could possibly this story mean for you, the viewer? Well, take a few moments and see how when someone says something to you which is slightly offensive, how a dualistic reaction results in you, and how then you act in certain ways that you may regret later on. And then remember Tokusan in his oneness, how these things did not truly affect him. So let us continue the story. We have here now I will repeat it first and then I will continue add a little bit to it. So I repeat, one day old Master Tokusan went down towards the dining room, holding his eating bowls. Seppo was on duty, cooking. When he met Tokusan, he asked, "Where are you off to with your eating bowls? The bell has not rung, and the drum has not sounded." Tokusan turned around and went back to his room. So far, so good. Seppo mentioned this to Ganto, who remarked, Old Tokusan is renowned, but he doesn't know the last word of truth." So that's the little addition that we're going to discuss now. While we knew that Seppo at the time of this story was still junior and that his Dharma wasn't opened, Ganto, on the other hand, was known as a master as well, also living in a state of unity just like Tokusan. So when Seppo told him what had happened, Ganto, the more senior one, must have realized Seppo's lack of consideration and slight arrogant behavior towards the Grandmaster Tokusan. Ganto probably felt that Seppo should have recognized the oneness and the love surrounding Tokusan, in spite of stressing his mistake related to the time of lunch. It would be in this spirit that a bow of recognition to Tokusan and to his own unity would be more appropriate rather than some confrontational, "Hey old man, where are you off to with your eating bowls?" Isn't that why bowing to each other is such a nice gesture? I recognize your unity, which is the same as everybody's unity. However, in this story, instead of pointing out Seppo's mistake, Ganto pretends to be in agreement with Seppo, and he even adds oil to the fire by saying, "By the way, this old Tokusan, he doesn't know the last word of truth." So to sound as if he endorses Seppo's behavior, and as if he's like an accomplice insulting Tokusan together with his mate Seppo. You may wonder why that happened. This is really very refined. When a friend or a child makes a mistake, one tends to correct him or her by pointing out to him or her you were wrong. You should have acted differently. I will tell you how you should have acted. You should have bowed. You should not have told Tokusan, where are you off to with your eating bowls? We all know that that kind of direct reprimand will be met with resistance because we don't see our own mistakes and we are too proud to admit we are wrong. And we will even become angry of being treated like a child. So what does Ganto do? He chooses to first play along with Seppo, with his non-enlightened friend, and say, yeah, this old Tokusan does not know the last word of truth, to seem to be colluding with him in order not to reach to this kind of confrontation. What can we learn from this part of the story? Well, what does it mean to you? See how when you have a dualistic tendency to correct someone's behavior, it almost always produces the opposite effect. Now let's see what happens next in this story. So we ended with Ganto remarking, old Tokusan does not know the last word of truth. That was what Ganto said to Seppo. Then we continue. Tokusan, in his quarters, heard about Ganto's remark to Seppo and sent his attendant to fetch Ganto. So, you do not approve of my Zen? Tokusan asked. Ganto whispered something back into Tokusan's ear. Now, if Tokusan and Ganto would be mired in dualism, we may think that Tokusan wanted to reprimand Ganto, like saying, pulling him by his ear, what have you done? And that Ganto would have whispered into Tokusan's ear, oh, it's not me, I just had to deal with this situation with our cook Seppo who disrespected you, etc., etc., etc. This is maybe what you might think when you hear this part of the story for the first time. However, we already said that both Ganto and Tokusan are Zen masters, well established in the ocean of consciousness. And that this explanation I just gave is then probably also to be very unlikely. Tokusan couldn't probably care less about Ganto saying, the old master doesn't know the last word of truth yet, because that's just an opinion. Tokusan couldn't care less about whether someone approves or disapproves his Zen. Because when one is rooted in the ocean of non-dualism, one doesn't care about other people's opinion. And that is because we no longer identify with a body-mind here or an ego construct here, which is fragile and which is prone of being attacked by others' opinions. Much more likely would have been that Tokusan just became a little curious about what happened, and with a broad smile said, "What the hell's going on, Ganto? You don't approve of my Zen?" And what could Ganto then have whispered back into Tokusan's ear? I could imagine it was something like, "It's funny. Some idiots down in the kitchen doubt about you. I suggest you show off during tomorrow's talk, and then you'll see I'll make it right. Something like that. Now, this part of the story, what does it mean for you? See how living in duality makes you fragile, and how much energy you have to spend each day protecting this empty shell which you think you are. And remember Ganto, remember Tokusan, how living in non-dualism, they are no longer affected by opinions. So the last part of the story ends as follows. Tokusan said nothing at the time, but the next day he ascended the podium to make a speech. And behold, he was very different from the usual. Ganto, going toward the front of the hall, clapped his hands and laughed, saying, "Ha! Our old man has got hold of the last word. From now on, nobody in this whole country can outdo him." So what is the end of this story all about? Well, by the time this incident in the kitchen happened the day before and the moment of the speech by Tokusan, rumors probably have spread within the monastery quickly. It's like a fire going into an oil-drenched cloth. And these rumors were, Tokusan, he's becoming old and senile, etc., etc. You know those kind of rumors in the context of a monastery? Ooh, they go very fast. But then after the lecture, not only were these rumors put to an end, they were even 100% turned around. The lecture could have hinted at the kitchen incident, but that judging it as right or wrong, clever or silly is so dualistic, and that deep below those judging waves is the vast ocean of peace and tranquility, which is accessible to all looking within, including Tokusan, Ganto, Seppo, all other monks, me and you, the viewer watching this. It's not something to be achieved, by the way. We just need to recognize it in this moment. And once we are established in it, nothing can disturb that peace. It is not something you reach after accumulating wisdom. It is not about Tokusan reaching the last word of truth. It is rather about letting go of the self, letting go of all notions, letting go of judgmental thoughts, letting go of controlling voices pretending he or she is what we are, till we establish ourselves as that deep ocean. And conveying this to the monks, they could only do what Seppo, the cook, failed to do in the kitchen that other day. Bow, not to Tokusan, but to this grand, limitless ocean which lies deep within ourselves. Thank you very much.